Okay. Let's see, I have simplified this form a bit. I removed the description so that it's one in one line and it looks a bit better. Let's do one last thing here that you will need also for the rest of the activity. Let's see, let's try to add some names again and see what happens. So now if I add the same person twice, there is no problem. I can just add again and again, and I can add the same person 1 or 2 or 3 times, and it creates these users with the same name. But ideally, I would also want to have some kind of a unique identifier for each student. So maybe 2 students have the same name, and this shouldn't be an issue, but there should be like 2 different people if I want to accept different students with the same name. Okay, so normally what we do when we store these things, these items somewhere like in an object, we also have some ID, some unique identifier. So if I wanted to create the student objects, I would need to add some ID that would increase like a counter. Every time I add a new student, a new ID will be created and each student will have its own unique ID. So in order to do that, apart from initiating students array, let's say student ID, I will start with a student ID equals to 1. And every time I create a new student object, I add as an ID the student ID, and then I increase the student ID so that the next time I'm going to add this new object, it starts from ID 1, ID 2, ID 3, so each student has a new ID. So now let's say I add this student and it also has an ID 1. But then if I add the student again, because maybe there are 2 students with the same name, I can identify if it is the first or the second because they have different IDs. One is with ID 1 and one is with ID 2. And this is a common practice when we want to store items that we have unique IDs to identify the different things. And I could also use this same ID when I create this student block and add it to the span or div or whatever element I'm creating for representing this. Okay, I changed this to div actually. So now this grid that I have created has 2 divs, this and this. But it doesn't have any ID, and it's a good also idea that when I create this div, so when I call this add new student function that will be creating these divs, I also, the same way I'm adding the text on this item with the inner HTML, I can also add an ID and set this to the ID of the student. For this, instead of just passing the name, I actually need to pass the whole student object to this function. Okay, because now in this function, I was just passing the name. Let's go with. And so the inner HTML should be the student name. It's the object that I have created, and the ID, sorry, this changed line, it's the student ID. So like this, I will be creating unique, let's say divs that will have the name of each student, but also the ID of each student as an attribute. And if I try it here, let me see, maybe I did not pass it correctly. Yeah, I'm a student. Student dot first name. Oh, sorry, I was confused. So here it's not name, it's first name. Okay, so this works, and then if I just add melon, and then I have first with 1 and second with 2, and also if we check here on the HTML, on my grid, I have 2 items, this div with ID 1 and this div with ID 2. We will need this for the next part, because on the next part, what you want to do is that when you click on one of the items, you have this item like represented in the featured section, so that when I click somewhere, I understand which item is clicked and I get all the information related to this item to show on the top on the featured section. We will show the title and the description. Okay, so then let's say I add some more names. And I need to remember all your, maybe I don't write some correct, sorry. So I have some students added, and of course now it's not clickable. So we find this grid of students would make each item it's other to its item. Create and here create text and then also as grid item and listener, and then that means that every time I click on this div, some other function will be called. So choose item function, some function that I have not yet defined, but then maybe I will have this choose item function called every time I click on each one of these items. So this would be one way and it can work, but like this, I need to create many event listeners. One event listener, so I don't know. Do you see me correctly, or maybe my internet is not working well? I don't know if the rest are. So for many, maybe it's me. Let's hope it will improve. Let's see. I'll continue and hope it will improve. And if not, I hope at the recording, at least it will be correct. So we could add different event listeners to each item of my grid, but this is not the most optimal way. There is another way of doing that. I could also add like one event listener to the grid container, and the grid container will catch every event happening inside of this. Because what happens with the events is that the events, they bubble up, as it's called. So when we click somewhere, it's also transmitted this click to the parents and the parents and the parents. So anyone on the higher level can catch that an event has happened to a child. So that is useful in this case. Let me show you an example here. Where is the backward table? So here we have also, this is similar, it's like a grid of items. It has some information, and every time I click on one, it's getting red. So it's just a simple click event listener that it detects where it was clicked and it changes the background color to red. But instead of adding 9 event listeners, or 1 event listener for each box, in this case, we can add 1 event listener for the whole container of these boxes. And then every time we click somewhere, the parent can hear which child has been affected by the event. So if we check this, I don't know if we will see it here in the script. So the event listener, in this case, it was added to the table. The table is the whole container. It's the one that it includes all the elements. So the event listener is added on the table, and then every time an event is happening, we just check to see what was the target of the event so that we can get the target, and the target will be the concrete cell, the concrete item, so the concrete div where we clicked, and then we can do some things to that item only, but we don't need to add all the event listeners for all items. We can just add one on the global container. And basically, this is what we're going to do now here. Instead of adding event listeners like this to all smaller items of my grid that I'm creating, we are going to add this event listener to the grid container. I think I have the grid container grabbed here. Is this one, the students grid? So I'm going to add an event listener for this. Okay, so this student list is this student grid that I have, that is the grid of my students, right? See, if you check here, it's this div item, students grid, that will be including all the boxes that I'm creating. So I'm adding an event listener to this outer element, to the students grid, and then let's see what happens when I click here. So for now, I will create this function, the choose item function, to just console log what we get. I choose item. It will get an event, and I'm just console logging event target, or even event target ID. And let's add some students again to see what happens. So I will use some of the names I have here, which is easier. So I have these 3 students added. And then when I click on one, it shows me here the ID of the item that I have clicked. So see that this Eli Bonada is ID number 2. If I click here, it shows 1, it shows 3, 2. So it detects, even though the listener is on the outer grid, it detects in which box I have clicked, because these boxes are children of the outer grid, and it can, the event target then, it's the box itself. And so it shows me the ID or whatever I put here. If I don't want to show the ID, and then maybe I need to show the inner HTML of the target, then I could also do that. So I can, so I see that I clicked Edward, I clicked Anna, or I clicked whatever. So like this, I can grab where the click has happened from the children. And one thing to be careful here is that if I click in the middle somewhere, this also is counting as a click from a children element, because I have in the middle here, I have some span or some other element. So it will return what I clicked, even if I don't click in one of the boxes itself. So if I click on the box, then okay, but what happens if I click on the middle of the grid? Then the middle of the grid will basically return me this ID, the students grid, because it will detect that I have clicked somewhere in the students grid, but not in a concrete box. So in order to avoid this, we want to just grab the clicks only if they are on one of these items, basically. So we want to make sure that we just grab the clicks if they are on one of these boxes. Okay, so if these boxes are, I will just put it back to span elements to make it easier. So I can say that if the event target is span, then do something. So that I only react when I click on a box, not when I click on it in between places. Okay, so if I click on one of the span boxes, then I do something. I show something, or I call some other function, or I change the color or whatever. But when I click in the middle, in the between places, then I simply don't do anything. So here it will be your code here. So whatever you want to do when you want to click on one of the boxes. So let's try some console log. So I will just put the console log in here and try to see what happens if I just. So if I click event target, is it? Let me console log the event target. I'm not sure if it is type. A lot. I really suggest that you do the same, because sometimes you just don't remember exactly and you just want to check it, and it's okay to just console log event target. It's a span. I need to write it. Event. Type target span. It's not name, no name. Name or something like that. Tag name. Yes, I think this will be better to just have it as a string, the type, and compare it with tag name. So this would be one way of getting this. And then when I click on one of these, then it's okay. But if I click on the middle, then it doesn't, well, this console log is the event. It doesn't console log the inner HTML because it understands that I did not click in one of the spans if I click on the middle. So what we would want to do with the exercise, we can start now by going through the ones that we did so far. So we can work independently, and me and Joy can help you, because like that we can review each one of the questions that you have on the previous part, and then the ones that they have the previous part already done, they can start working with the third part. For the third part, you don't really need nothing more. You need a form to grab the items. You need to save them somewhere in some kind of object. And then you need this thing that when you click on one of the items, something happens. And for this, you can use this. So you can use this setting of a global event listener to your grid. And then when you click, you pass the information of which item has been clicked, so that you show it in the featured section. You should have some kind of section that is empty at the beginning, and then you show some information there. Same as I was console logging which item it was clicked. Instead of console logging, you just add it in the featured section. Okay, questions? Another, so a small thing for the form also, when you use a form, you can use a form reset at the end when you have already grabbed all items, so that you empty the fields. Okay, so like now when I was just adding some names, and if I click add, I really want that these fields are empty again for the next user to be added. So I can empty them as I was doing with input by input. So setting the input value to empty. Or if I use a form, I can just do the form reset. There is this method for forms that just empties the whole form. So that you can use it like that as well. Okay. So I'm guessing that you have questions that maybe they are more specific in your code, or if you want to review some of this also one by one, we can use this time now. And let's go over, yes. So let's start the activity. I don't have to pass any more link. You have all the information there. I will create the breakout rooms.